The wind over the Serac Plateau sounded like the drawn-out whistle of a far-off train, though the nearest rails lay 1,000 miles south. That illusion, when turning stone valleys into hollow flutes, was the first thing Lyra Anvik heard when she stepped from the sled at the edge of the plateau. The second thing was silence. A hush so total it felt medicinal. Somewhere beneath the crust of that quiet waited the reason she had come. The legendary Onyx Monolith that absorbed forgotten stories and released them, night after night, as shifting curtains of light for any wanderer who cared to look up. Lyra tightened the straps of her satchel, nodding thanks to Sena the musher who had hauled her across 300 miles of fern and drift. Sena pressed a rawhide bundle into her hands, dried fish, a chipped cup, matches, and pointed at the bruised sky. "Storm by dawn," she warned, her voice as flinty as the terrain. "If you're not back at base camp in 2 days, I'll assume you followed your own story into the dark." Then she slapped the flank of her lead dog, shouted a command in a language older than calendars, and vanished into the rising spindrift. Lyra watched the sled disappear, half wishing she had asked Sena to wait. But yearning was why she was here. Wanting, overpowering, irrational, marrow-deep. Wanting was the engine of the world, and the monolith, if the old expedition journals were to be believed, was a refinery for that engine's exhaust. It ate forgotten stories, digested them, and released their distilled luminescence into the atmosphere. The northern lights, the journals insisted, were not collisions of charged solar particles. They were memories, stripped of detail, but not emotion, turning the sky into a library whose volumes dissolved before anyone could read them. The plateau stretched ahead, ragged with pressure ridges that gleamed silver where the sun slipped through. She marched toward the coordinates scratched in her notebook, 8219 Nint, 4122. Behind her trudged a sled with a single crate. Inside the crate, swaddled in wool, was a small tin cylinder labeled simply Mikael. There was a time Lyra could have recited every syllable her brother ever wrote, from the poems about saltwater insects he'd penned at 12 to the delirious letters dispatched from army barracks at 19. Mikael had been a weaver of improbable fables, ghost whales, cities beneath petrified waves, children who stole moonbeams and baked them into bread. Then he'd gone to war, vanished during a night skirmish, and returned months later without a single story left in him. His letters thereafter were factual, bloodless, stripped of imaginative sinew. Something had swallowed the part of him that told stories, and Lyra had spent 5 years searching for a mouth wide enough to perform such a swallowing. The journals of Ansel Torrance had provided an answer. Torrance, an explorer whose maps were rumored to be inked with the ashes of burned diary pages, wrote of an onyx tooth driven into the Earth's polar palate, a monolith that feeds on tales no one keeps, on memories denied witness. Torrance had camped beneath the stone in 1889 and claimed that, during an emerald aurora, he had heard voices reciting half-remembered myths in tongues he did not know. Lyra was a folklorist, not a mystic, but when she read Torrance, she felt the telltale prickle behind the eyes that scholars get when they realize they are about to gamble reputation for revelation. She trudged until the sky dimmed. At twilight, the plateau's edges blurred, and the ridges looked like corrugated bone. She pitched her tent in the leeward shadow of a rock scar and unpacked the tin cylinder. Inside were 74 pages of Mikael's earliest notebooks, first drafts, crossed-out metaphors, doodles of winged wolves. These were the only pages the war hadn't claimed for ration paper or kindling. Lyra had preserved them in vacuum-sealed sleeves. Tonight, she would read them aloud beside the monolith, gift them to whatever mechanism ate forgotten stories, and pray the lights overhead might one day reverse their flow, returning words to Mikael's tongue instead of stripping them away. At 3:17 a.m., the storm hit. It arrived like an avalanche of flour, visibility collapsing to an arm's length. The cold was a living adversary, seeping through seams, elbowing between layers of wool. But beneath the storm's howl, somewhere in the white obscurity, Lyra heard a different sound. A resonant hum, low and oscillating, like a colossal glass harp. She followed it blindly, compass needles spinning uselessly in electromagnetic interference none of her instruments could pass. When she emerged from the whiteout, she found herself in a basin disguised by drift. In the centre stood an obelisk the colour of a starless night. Though wind scoured the basin, no snow clung to the monolith's surface. Flakes that touched it evaporated or slid away, leaving its plains as pristine as a dream unmarred by waking. It was taller than any steeple, but not smooth. Its faces were chiselled into hexagonal facets, reminiscent of insect eyes. Lyra approached until her reflection, shivering and pale, stared back from 50 angles. The hum nested in her sternum now, resonating with her pulse. She pressed a glove against the stone. It was warm. With a gasp, she yanked her hand back and saw, embedded in her palm, fine particles of black dust that glittered like crushed beetles. She remembered Torrent's writing. The stone tastes flesh, not for blood but for biography. One must decide how much to feed it. She fetched Mikael's pages and stood at what she guessed was the monolith's eastern face. Storm clouds had thinned. Above them, faint ribbons of green twitched. "I brought you these," she said, ridiculous and formal, as if addressing a monarch. "They're not forgotten, not by me, but they're fading. He can't find them anymore. Take them if it means he can have new ones." Then she tore a page free, Mikael's childish scrawl charting a kingdom of migrating constellations, and pressed it against the stone. The paper dissolved, fibre draining into onyx like ink sucked up by thirsty blotter. Where it disappeared, a fleeting afterimage bloomed, a map drawn in phosphorescent lines, islands orbiting a dream of flight. The lines swirled into the night sky, joining nascent auroral threads. Lyra fed page after page. Each was absorbed, transformed into light that spiraled overhead, mixing with the charged particulate ballet. She watched entire childhood summers transmuted into colour. The fuchsia of wild rose petals they had used as pirate currency, the gold of sand fleas that jumped in arcs like punctuation marks, the ultraviolet of bruises earned during rooftop daring. The sky became a stained glass chronicle of a boy who had loved words more than sleep. Lyra wept until the salt froze on her cheeks. She thought she was alone with the monolith, but at the end of the offering a voice said, "You gave it a feast." She turned and saw a man standing atop a snow mound, face wrapped in sealskin, only his eyes visible. They glowed with auroral reflection. "Some bring crumbs," he said, sliding down. "You brought an entire child. That will keep it sated. For a little while." "Who are you?" Lyra asked, throat raw. "Caretaker. Warden. A title is a fence. I prefer open ground." He kneeled, touched the minerals at the stone's base. "It digests slower than you'd think. Stories ferment. When enough accumulate, they seek sky. That's when wanderers hear lullabies in foreign vowels." Lyra gathered herself. "Can it give the stories back? Or give new ones in trade?" The caretaker cocked his head, as if listening to an inner weather report. "Everything the monolith releases is gift, but not to the giver. To those who need it most, often people far away, under other skies, like seeds on the wind." He looked at the annihilated notebook. "Your brother loses stories, you say?" "He hasn't written in 5 years," she replied. "Sometimes he mouths words, but nothing lands on the page. The doctors call it trauma-induced aphasia. I call it theft." The caretaker circled the monolith, trailing gloved fingers along its facets. "Loss is gravity. This stone condenses gravity, squeezes it into prism bars you call Aurora. Every night, wanderers watch and feel a little lighter, though they don't know why. Your gift will lighten many." He stopped before Lyra, But you want a private miracle. For that you must do more than feed it. You must bargain. Oh. Place your intention inside. He tapped her sternum. And risk never returning to claim it. Lyra's breath plume trembled. You want me to step into the monolith? A nod. It hungers, but it's not indiscriminate. If your story is strong enough, it will host you rather than digest you. You may walk its corridors, perhaps find fragments of what it took from your brother. Bring them out, they're yours. Fail, and you become part of the next Skydance. The proposition fluttered in her ribcage like a terrified finch. Yet the idea of going back empty-handed, of facing Mikhail across a table littered with blank pages was worse. What do I have to do? The caretaker produced a slim blade of obsidian. Open your hand. The stone already tasted you. Now feed it the rest. Lyra removed her glove. The cold stung like wasps, but she held steady while the caretaker scored her palm. Blood welled dark. He pressed her hand against the monolith. Where crimson touched onyx, the surface melted, becoming a viscous portal that shimmered with green phosphor. Step quickly, he said. It will seal behind you like clotting. She inhaled once, twice, then plunged through. Inside there was no inside, only a sensation of falling sideways through pages that flipped without wind. Every surface was letters, alphabets she recognized. Glyphs she didn't. Words raveled into chords that braided and unbraided around her. She landed on a platform composed of overlapping sentences that rearranged themselves to bear her weight. Somewhere nearby, water dripped in metered rhyme. A hallway unfolded, lined with alcoves shaped like open books. In each alcove hovered a scene, three-dimensional, semi-translucent, alive. A fisherman singing to his nets. A grandmother teaching 4 languages to a toddler. A soldier writing a farewell on the inside of a helmet. Forgotten stories, preserved mid gesture. Lyra walked, scanning for Mikhail's voice. Here were memories, certainly, but none hers. She passed a desert caravan lost amid glass dunes, a lover's quarrel resolved by trading shadows. A locksmith who could pick the tumblers of nightmares. Each tableau pulsed, wanting release. They recognized a potential liberator in her, but she murmured apologies and moved on. Hours or minutes or years later, she came to a chamber without walls. Floating before her was a single page, blank except for a date. 14 November. That was the night Mikhail had disappeared from the front line. Lyra reached for the page. As her fingers brushed it, ink fountained across the paper, sketching trenches, flares. A figure crawling through muck, clutching a notebook to his chest. But the ink froze before the figure's face could form, leaving a featureless oval. A voice gasped behind her. She wheeled and saw Mikhail, or rather a younger version, crouched, scribbling frantic lines into an unseen journal. She called his name. He didn't hear. She understood. This was only a memory, repeating. Still, memory could be harvested. She stepped closer, arms extended. The scene shivered, resisting. Lines of narrative lashed at her, trying to push her away, sentences stiff as spears. Lyra thought of nights when she had coaxed Mikhail to sleep by reciting old sagas. She spoke now, softly, reciting the first story he ever told her, about a boy who swallowed a star and burped constellations. The spear sentences melted into fireflies. The blank-faced figure lifted its head, and for a heartbeat, eyes appeared. Her brother's hawk-brown eyes, wide with wonder. The tableau shrank into a small sphere of light, hovering like a lantern. Lyra cupped it. Warmth seeped through her mittens, traveling up her arms, rooting itself in her spine. "Come home," she whispered. "I'll trade my silence for your words." The sphere pulsed, then flickered, dimming as if indecisive. She squeezed it to her chest, felt it slide into her sternum like a bead drawn into magnetized flesh. A corresponding emptiness opened in her throat, as if vowels had been siphoned away. She tried to speak and produced only breath. The bargain, she realized. A voice for a voice. The architecture around her buckled. Sentences sloughed off walls, turning to liquid phrase, swirling toward a drain she couldn't see. The monolith was expelling her. She ran, chasing the gravity of egress, clutching her aching chest. At the threshold where she had entered, a film of green light waited, wobbling like soap. She threw herself through. Night cracked open. Lyra tumbled into snow, retching words she couldn't utter. The caretaker knelt beside her. "Did you find it?" She shook her head yes and no simultaneously. But nothing followed. Her voice was gone, exiled behind a barricade of perfect muteness. The caretaker placed a hand over her heart. It lodged within. "It will gestate. Give it time." He helped her to her feet. The aurora above had intensified, furious rivers of turquoise and violet beating against invisible banks. "Listen," he said. Lyra tilted her head. Amid the crackle of geomagnetic static, she heard a voice not her own surge across the sky. "Sister, the guns are quiet. I dreamed a staircase of ice that led me home. Will you hold the lantern while I climb?" Mikhail's words, new words, sung by the heavens. She sobbed silently. The caretaker smiled. "Your silence, his story. Not forever. When he writes again, your voice will find passage back. Until then, speak with your hands, your gaze. So many languages remain." They made camp. He brewed lichen tea while she traced questions in snow. He answered aloud, teaching her the grammar of gesture. Above them, Mikhail's burgeoning legend unraveled in lights, seen by stray backpackers and long-haul pilots who would wake in distant countries wanting to write poems, without knowing why. 3 days later, Lyra returned to base camp, where Senna waited, squinting at the aurora. When Lyra emerged from the gloom, Senna asked for a report. Lyra opened her mouth, managed a whisper scraped from gravel. "Soon." Senna nodded, unperturbed. The plateau stole many things, but it often returned them elsewhere, in other forms. Months passed. Lyra settled in a cottage by the sea, fingers itching for chalk and slate. She taught herself to communicate through sketches. Sometimes she dreamt of pages fluttering like moths against cooling glass. In the 5th month, a parcel arrived, postmarked from a rehabilitation center in the south. Inside was a fresh notebook, every page filled in Mikhail's looping hand. The first entry read, "I don't know why stories returned, except I woke one night feeling my sister's heartbeat in my teeth. The sky outside the ward window was bleeding color and I tasted salt. The doctors think it's progress. I think it's home." Lyra pressed the notebook to her mute lips and felt her throat warm, a seed cracking. Days later, while brewing tea, she hummed one note, then another. A week after that, she spoke an entire sentence to the gulls. The gulls, offended by the intrusion, scattered, but Lyra laughed, tasting vowels like fruit. She wrote to Mikhail, her letters compact, economical yet brimming. She told him she had traded silence for his voice and that the debt was almost settled. She did not mention the caretaker or the monolith. Some myths ripen better when left unspoken. One June night, Mikhail arrived unannounced, carrying a knapsack stuffed with drafts. He and Lyra sat on the porch, watching the horizon where late sunsets blurred into auroral preludes. "I have more stories than time," he confessed, eyes fever-bright. "But I worry they'll vanish again." "They worry they'll vanish again?" "They worried," she said, her voice steady now, richer for its months of absence. "We learn the shape or loss. That knowledge is a lock." She touched the scarred center of her palm stool, dark with mineral flecks, then took his hand and placed it over her own heart, which beat a contrapuntal rhythm. Mine, yours, ours. Above, faint veils of green and pink began their slow waltz. Somewhere between pulse and sky, the Onyx Monolith shifted, digesting new offerings, preparing fresh spectacles. Perhaps other siblings, lovers, or dreamers trudged toward it even now, clutching half-erased tales, desperate for alchemy. Lyra closed her eyes, listening. In the distance, borne on magnetic winds, came a chorus of half-remembered narratives, each searching for someone who needed it most. The legend of the monolith endured, unrecorded in official ledgers, but etched in human marrow, the promise that no story, however forgotten, was ever truly lost. It might simply be waiting to paint the heavens, to coax a silent mouth into song, or to guide a wanderer across a radius of cold toward a place where words finally find their way home.